Well, welcome back to the Communication Mastery Podcast with me, Mark Burlinson. This is where we unleash the power of understanding so we can build bridges, not boxes, because we understand that communication is the soil in which teamwork thrives. And goodness knows, this world needs better teamwork, doesn't it? So this week, we want to look at leading, to focus in on business leaders and to talk about leading with clarity, because effective leaders have to be able to communicate clearly. So any of you in leadership in any way in business, this one's for you, that you can increase your clarity of communication. And if you're thinking, oh, I'll just turn this off because I'm not a leader, I want to remind you that you're leading somebody, even if it's not everybody. And so most of us are leaders in some way, shape or form. And I think there's stuff in here that's going to be helpful to you, whether you consider yourself a leader or not. Take a listen and see whether some of this would be helpful in this week's work settings. So I've got 6 keys for leaders in business that will help us to ensure that our communication is clear and effective. And the first one is simply this: clarify your message. Think ahead of time about what it is you need to say, what it is you need to convey. Because if you're going to lead others, they need to be very clear about your goals, or about your ideas, or about your suggestions. You want to be a person of influence, that's why you're a leader, but you need to be clear in what you're communicating so everyone else can get it as quickly as possible and as easily as possible. So taking the time to clarify your message before you communicate it to your colleagues or to your team is a vital step. And the larger the team, the more important this step is. Because once you've clarified it in your own mind, and remember to filter it through, how are different people going to hear this? It may make sense to you, but it may not be in a form that's receivable by others. That's where our adaptability comes in. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But articulate your goals and then the steps toward them in as concise a manner as you can, as clear a manner as you can. Be as straightforward as you can. Don't overcomplicate things, because that will reduce misunderstanding. It'll reduce confusion. And it'll allow your team members to align their efforts with your goals. They'll be able to step into the congruency that helps every team to flourish. And so that'll give you increased efficiency and productivity with the team, but it'll also give you engaged teamwork because you've taken the time to clarify the message you want them to receive. Now, some of us struggle with articulating the steps toward a goal, or even articulating the goal itself. And if that's a challenge for you, then you need to find somebody within your team, as would be the case for me actually, where the shaper language in the life language profile is strong. It's not my first language, but it's my second, and it's still quite strong, because the shaper language is the language that it naturally can figure out steps toward a goal. To see the goal, the end point from where we are, and work out all the steps in between. And it may be that you have somebody on your team who's strong in that language, even if you're not. And that's where you can benefit from bringing others into the equation. But clarifying your message and setting out the steps clearly is always step one for an effective leader to bring their team with them on the journey toward the goal and the vision. The second step that I want to encourage you to invest in is active listening, because if your team is to thrive, there's got to be a spirit of trust and respect within the team. And open dialogue is a key ingredient in building trust and respect. But you can't have open dialogue until the leader practices active listening. So typically for leaders, we tend to listen waiting to respond, waiting to give an answer, waiting to give an instruction, waiting to correct something. Or maybe we're allowing distractions to steal away our understanding of what the person on our team is saying to us. You're thinking about next month's results, or tomorrow's appointments, or the next challenge on your list, and not really listening to the person in front of you. So if I'm to engage active listening, I need to fully focus on the person I'm communicating with, or who's communicating with me, maybe more accurately. And if I can understand and respond to them in a way that draws out of them the fullness of what they want to say, I'll benefit from receiving the whole of their input and not missing any of it. And it requires engaging to make sure that that message is received adequately and clearly. If you can't receive what they're saying accurately, then you're not going to be able to respond in the most appropriate ways. You're going to miss something. And that's always going to be a disaster for any leader. Better to get it right first time than to have to go back and redo something that I got wrong. So first of all, you give the speaker your full focus. You make eye contact. You minimize distractions. Maybe turn your phone off or turn it over or whatever. Ask someone to shut the door. Whatever it is that helps you to focus on the person who's speaking to you. Then as you listen, you want to paraphrase or summarize what you're hearing. So that will show the person that's speaking to you that you're understanding what they're saying. And you might also ask questions to clear up any confusion or to delve deeper into what they're offering. And then you can acknowledge the feelings and the perspectives that you've heard. Oh, I see or I hear that you felt displaced by that action, or I can see that must be terribly difficult for you when what you're trying to do is not being received. Those kinds of responses. Reflecting back a degree of empathy is very helpful in active listening. And that fosters a supportive environment for the team member who's communicating with you as the leader. And then finally, you can offer thoughtful feedback or reaction based on what you've heard. In other words, this is not what I want to pass on to the person I'm leading as much as it's to say, I've heard what you've said and I can take it into consideration and it's helpful to me in this way or that way. Or I see that this will be valuable to us. Those kinds of responses encourage the team members to repeat the process of communicating with you, and you gain the great depth of understanding. There are some languages in the Life Languages profile that particularly need active listening, and it's very valuable when you do that. If you've been a regular listener to the podcast, you'll hear me talk often about the contemplator life language. If it's strong for somebody, they really need undivided attention and personal space to order to give you the benefit of their intelligence and their insight. But boy, will you benefit when you take the time to receive that. And when a leader practices active listening, then team members feel valued. It leads to higher morale. It leads to a more collaborative work environment. And so it's a very valuable investment. So that's step 2 is active listening. Another step that you can take as a leader in order to ensure that your communication is clear is to engage empathy and emotional intelligence, because this is an area that many of us tend to be weak in, but it's hard to develop, it's hard to lead effectively these days unless you have developed empathy and emotional intelligence, so you can acknowledge the feelings and perspectives of others. You see that this follows on from the whole principle of active listening that we talked about in the previous step, but this is going a step further because it requires self-awareness in me as well as my attention and focus on you. I need to have a sensitivity to those around me, so that I have the ability to regulate my responses and my actions appropriately to draw out the best in each of them, rather than causing them maybe to withdraw or to shut down. When team members feel understood and they feel appreciated, their motivation and their loyalty to the business or the team increases dramatically. And that's a challenge for all of us to foster that, but this is a very easy way to increase team bonding, team empathy, team enthusiasm. So the challenge of EQ, emotional intelligence, the challenge of empathy is that you and I seldom know when we're lacking it. It's easy to get into a situation where you haven't noticed that your emotional intelligence kind of got left behind because there's some issue that you're focused on or some challenge that you're facing, and you forgot to be empathetic and you forgot to listen and be aware of the needs of those around you. I often say, you don't know what you don't know. And I find that sometimes my clients are surprised when I reflect to them that their EQ could benefit from some attention to increase it. So I encourage you to find someone who'll be honest with you in this area. because it behooves all of us to increase our emotional intelligence, to increase our empathy with our teams, because until we do, they're not going to be able to make a connection with us that enables them to receive our communication clearly and effectively. So that was step 3, increasing emotional intelligence. The 4th step for a leader to communicate clearly would be consistency, because consistency is what builds credibility and trust with your team. When team members know what to expect from their leader, then their anxiety is reduced, it enhances team cohesion, and everyone feels more secure in their roles, because there's this sort of steady foundation of the leader's presence and the leader's predictability that gives them the space to become who they can be within the team. Now, most of us struggle to be consistent because of the frustrations of life, the challenges of business. Those all create pressure. And as I said before, pressure can be the enemy of EQ and empathy. So maybe pause the podcast right here for a moment and consider for you, where is your consistency most challenged? In what settings do you find it the most difficult or the most stressful to maintain consistent relationship and consistent presence for your team in your business or wherever it may be? What settings are the least consistent in your leadership? What are the ones that something comes out of left field and it knocks everything off of equilibrium, so that you then have to keep recalibrating with the team? And then what one area would yield the most benefit to you and your team if you were to brainstorm some thoughts on how to guard your consistency in that circumstance? Because as a leader, we need you to have the stability that your team can then rally around in order to be safe to communicate with one another, to be able to dig deep into their understanding, to be able to offer what each one has to offer, because each is different. Your consistency in the heart of that team will really build team strength and will make your communication with your team far more effective. The 5th key to a leader being effective as a communicator and clear as a communicator is to have open feedback channels. It follows very easily from consistency, because maintaining open channels for feedback makes a leader more accessible, more relatable. It empowers team members. It promotes innovation. It promotes problem solving when people can come forward with their ideas, can come forward with their observations, and that is actively encouraged and received without pushback. So when employees feel they can share ideas and concerns, that'll lead to better decision making for you and the whole team. You have the benefit of the input of a whole lot of different eyes and ears and voices, so that you have all of the data you need to make the best decision for the business, for the organization. It also leads to a more engaged workforce, and that's a very beneficial thing for any team, isn't it? So here's the key to this one. You must ask for feedback. You won't get feedback just by waiting for it. You have to ask for it. I want your feedback on this. I want your feedback in that area. I want to hear from you. What do you see? What do you hear? What have I missed? What could I do better? What could we as a team learn from what we've just gone through? And then you need to guard your reactions to make sure that you don't reject the input that you're hearing. It may be that somebody on your team has a chip on their shoulder or a grudge to bear, and they'll come through with something that you really want to just put up a hand and tell them to stop it. But actually, if you don't do that, if you resist that urge, then you will be able to get input from others. You see, everyone's watching that one person who always comes forward with a negative to see what your reaction will be. And if you simply say, thank you, and then leave it, they will see that you receive input even when it's hard to receive. That's a huge step forward for any leader. All of us want to push away negative feedback. It's natural to do that, especially if you think the person is wrong. But there's always something you can learn from whatever it is that person is saying, even if they're not saying it in a way that's easy to receive. So if you say thank you, and then take time later to assess that feedback given and any reaction in you to that feedback, you'll benefit from any little nuggets that are within it that you can learn from, even if the majority of it is unhelpful. You'll create a situation for your team where they feel free to chip in with their observations and with their input, and that'll be a benefit to everyone. And then the sixth key is adaptability. And this is the biggest key to effective communication as a leader. It's the one I talk about so often, the ability to adapt to those around us who are different. Because one size doesn't fit all, does it? And I've observed many leaders who struggle to adapt their communication to different team members or to different followers in their team. I was in a setting just a few weeks ago, a big meeting where the main leader really had something powerful that they'd seen in the organization that needed to be different. And the way they expressed it didn't take account of the range of personality styles, the range of communication styles in the room. They expressed it partly, I think, out of frustration, partly out of lack of training in communication, but they expressed it very strongly and very firmly and very directly out of their primary preferred communication style without taking the time to think, how do I adapt this so more people can receive it? So about 10% of the people in the room thought this was fantastic and it was great that somebody stood up and said it. And the other 90% of the people, well, no, that's overstating, maybe 75% of the people felt somewhat wounded or challenged in an unhelpful way by the way that it was said. In discussing it with 2 or 3 folks afterwards, they actually agreed with what was being said, but if it had been communicated differently, it would have been more easy to receive. So adaptability is a huge deal for all of us in our leadership. And understanding the life languages really helps with adaptability. One of the things I've used again and again with some of my business clients is a thing called the Success Communication Wheel, which talks about how to make sure that every one of those 7 communication styles feels connected to the process that we're engaged in, or the message we want to communicate, or the challenge we're facing, or the goal that we want to reach. The Success Communication Wheel is a very powerful tool, and so I recommend it to you if adaptability is your thing. So your communication mastery really matters to me. It's why I do what I do. And you can develop your clarity as a leader by clarifying your message, developing your ability in active listening, building your emotional intelligence and your empathy, as well as your consistency, having open feedback channels, and then making sure that you grow your adaptability so that others can follow you more effectively, more freely. You can always ask me questions by going to my website at markburlinson.com, click on the contact link, and send me any questions in that you want me to answer in future episodes. I hope that this has been helpful to you, whether you think you're a leader or not. Every one of these things will benefit you in some setting this week. So would you help me right now and maybe help somebody else, maybe a friend of yours or a work colleague of yours? Think of someone now who would benefit from some of these points that we've just looked at about clarity in leadership communication. And text them now with the link to this episode. Say, hey, I just listened to this. I think you'd enjoy it. Take a listen. And that will be a great benefit to them, but it'll also benefit me as it'll get the audience to grow for this podcast. So thank you for listening, and we'll be back next Monday with more Communication Mastery Insights. So text someone now, make sure they can join us next week. I'll see you soon.